Warning: the following content may be disturbing to some individuals. Consumer discretion is advised.
Do you hear it? The siren song luring you into the realm of folklore and myth. Haints and the undead, weird creatures and evil itself. If you come along for the ride, will you make it back? Let's go, ghouls! Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the very first episode of Sirens of the Supernatural. I'm Rhonda, and I'm going to introduce you to my fellow co-hosts and contributors. Ryan, my cousin. Ryan, give a wave or something. And this is Lindsay, my daughter. And we hope that you'll come along with us on some great adventures. One more shout out to our cousin behind the scenes who's producing the podcast, and we couldn't do it without him. So thank you, Mr. Producer behind the scenes. Now I'm going to step back and let Ryan and Lindsay tell you a little bit about themselves.
Well, how you doing? I'm Ryan. Of course, like Rhonda said, I'm a cousin. We grew up in Southwest Virginia, back in the holler, and folklore, supernatural, old wives' tales, haints and ghosts and goblins. That was a big part of our growing up. The parents always loved to scare us, of course, to make us behave. And it was something that we all kind of got into, and it growed with us throughout our whole lives. And we enjoyed listening to it, talking about it. And we want to share that with you guys. And hopefully you enjoyed it as much as we do. So, Lindsay?
Hi, guys. I'm Lindsay. I'm Rhonda's daughter. I feel like we have maybe the only spooky bond in our family because nobody else really likes anything spooky. So Mom and I have that connection. And I feel like growing up in North Carolina and Virginia, we have all these traditions and scary stories and myths and cryptids and creatures. And it's just too much to not be interested in, I think. So I'm just here to have a good time, really, and hear some scary stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And I'm Rhonda. Like Lindsay said, she and I have that spooky bond. She's my scary movie, scary lock-in, haunted locations. Yeah, everything partner. Her two siblings are not as much into that, or her dad, but her dad and I live now in the mountains of North Carolina near the beautiful Blue Ridge Parkway. But I grew up in Southwest Virginia, like Ron said, and if you're looking at Virginia on a map, it's kind of like in the toe of the boot. It's really close to Kentucky, about as far in Virginia as you can get without being in Kentucky. It's also close to the West Virginia border, and it's coal mining country. Most people there back in the day worked in the coal mines, and that was a hard life. And so for entertainment, they would sometimes try to scare each other, like our fathers and their brothers were always trying to get something spooky over on us. But that's where mine and probably Ryan's love of all things spooky started. We had our dad's mother's mother, our great-grandma, we called her Granny, Granny Keith. She could tell a story, and she liked to scare us kids because there were a lot of us and it kept us quiet. She enraptured us with her stories. And all of the people that we grew up around were just natural born storytellers. And they were superstitious, and I guess they might have brought some of that over our ancestors from the Scottish Highlands. But in honor of our Granny, today, for our very first episode, Ryan and I are going to share one of her stories. And then after we share the story, we'll tell you a little bit more about it. It's the very first scary story that I can remember ever hearing. So sit back and prepare to be scared or entertained, whichever one. Granny stood not even 5 feet tall. She was a petite little woman with a twinkle in her eyes and Cherokee in her blood. And she could make the hair on the back of a grown man's neck prickle when she told a scary story. Us young'uns heard this one many times growing up, and she told it for the truth. Away up near the mouth of the holler where she grew up lived a man named Reuben Banner. Now, Rueben and his wife Betsy, they made a peculiar pair. He was harsh, stingy, known to drink and gamble. People said crotchety old Reuben's meanness made him look years older than he was, and he never had a nice word to say about or to anyone. But he reserved his most hateful words for the church. Anytime Betsy asked him to go to meeting, which she always did, he would blast the preacher, the building, and those hypocrites in it. He said countless times that even the devil himself couldn't get Reuben Banner to church. But Betsy, she was as different from her man as night is from day. Kind and pious, she helped anyone who needed it, and she never said a mean word about nobody. She raised their 5 children with hard work, love, and religion, and took the kids to church every time the doors was open. Well, one September, folks was enjoying a dog days kind of summer when a traveling minister on a chestnut mare rode up and down the holler, inviting them to come to a week-long revival meeting at the church. It was going to start that Sunday evening, and most of them said they'd be there. Come Sunday morning, Betsy and the children headed to church as they normally did. And after they trekked on home, they enjoyed a big lunch and some porch sitting. Directly they began getting ready for the evening meeting. Everyone except old Rueben. He didn't go to regular meeting, and he was not going to revival. He spat out the words they'd heard so many times before. Even the devil himself couldn't get Reuben Banner to church. And that's what old Rueben said every evening from Monday plumb through to Friday.
Late Saturday afternoon, clouds rolled in, and it looked like a storm was a-brewing. In her kind way, Betsy once again asked her husband if he'd come on to the revival. By then, it was a sprinkling rain, and Rueben berated her for planning to walk to church with the young'uns in a storm. And he put more force than usual behind his declaration that even the devil himself couldn't get Reuben Banner to church. He watched his wife and kids walk down the holler until they was out of sight. As the evening shadows fell, Rueben went inside, took him a swigger of corn liquor, and went to the bedroom where he undressed and put up a long bed shirt. With it being such a warm night, the fireplace in the big room stayed empty, but Rueben did close the windows against the storm. Then he promptly fell asleep with nary a care in the world. Sometime after dark, Rueben sat straight up in bed with a jerk. He didn't know what woke him, but after a few loud booms, he reckoned it was just a clap of thunder. He laid back, pulled the thin sheet up over him, and closed his eyes. In a few minutes, he noticed a growing chill in the room. The storm was dying down, but the wind was still strong. He thought he heard it whistling through the trees in the pasture. As Rueben lay there listening, his eyes caught a new, shrill sound above the howling wind, like a scream. Not quite human, but not like any animal or bird he's ever heard. Was it coming from out in the field? Past the old apple tree? At first he couldn't make out any words, but as he strained his ears, his blood ran cold. That scream was calling a name. His name, faintly and slowly, but clearly. Reuben's mind was set to work trying to figure out if this was real, imagined, or even a dream. He pinched himself under the covers to make sure he was awake. That's when he heard his name again. It was closer this time. Reuben Banner. His eyes wide and his heart pounding, Reuben reached for the quilt at the foot of the bed, pulling it and the sheet up to his chin. Still as a church mouse, he listened. That last time, his name seemed to come from the barn just beyond the fence. Was his mind playing tricks on him? He'd never been one to believe in haints or banshees or the like, but on this night, all alone, in a dark room, Reuben wasn't so sure. Just then he heard heavy thuds on the porch, and his name coming clearer, stronger, and closer. Yes, he was definitely awake, and something was a-calling to him. Reuben Banner. Diving completely under the quilt, Reuben scarcely dared to breathe. His stomach knotted as the heavy thuds traveled up the outside of the house and onto the roof. Then all the eerily quiet for a moment. No thuds. No wind. No rain. Not even thunder. Until a deep and booming shout called down the chimney. Reuben!
Old Reuben didn't wait for that thing to jump down the chimney and get him. He leaped from the bed, tore open the door, and went screaming down the road, barefooted and terrified. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him straight for the church. Just as the preacher was given the invitation, Reuben burst through the doors and didn't stop until he collapsed at the altar. Folks said his face was as white as his nightshirt, and his hair, that had been black as tar earlier that day, had turned snow white too. When he caught his breath, he told that preacher he wanted to pray and be saved, and right then and there, Reuben Banner changed his ways. From that night on, he was a faithful church member, there with Betsy every time the church doors was open. And the holler folks said Reuben became the kindest, most hospitable man they'd ever seen or heard tell of. When he died at a good old age, people come from far and wide to pay their respects, and all spoke highly of him. There was nary a hint of the mean-spirited old Reuben.
And though he told the story of what happened to him that stormy night many times over, no one to this day knows what it was a-calling his name. Granny said maybe the old devil himself had gotten tired of Reuben's threats, or maybe the Holy Ghost even scared some sense into him. But even after the people in them parts told the story of Reuben Banner.
What'd you think about that, Lindsay?
I was both spooked and entertained.
That's good.
I
That's
just want
good.
to know, like, how old were you guys when you first heard that story? And did she really, like, tell it as a true story? Or do you think it was more just a kind of a, hey, this is a scary story, you should stay in church kind of thing?
It was probably a little bit of both. I would say that it was so specific. I remember some parts of it so well that there had to be a man named Rueben Banner somewhere down the line, whether he was like she described in the story, that mean and hateful. I don't know. But I remember hearing this story. I guess I was about 4 years old. Granny lived with my dad's mother and father, my mama and papa at that time. And for some reason, every time the electricity would go off in the neighborhood, everybody would gather at mama and papa's house. You remember that, Ryan?
Yep.
And so there would be a lot of grown-ups because my dad had 6 brothers besides him. And about all those brothers had kids. And so everybody would bring their kids come to Mama's house because I guess she had a wood stove and they would light candles and they'd put all us kids in one room and they would send her in there with us to keep us quiet. And that's the way she did. That's the way she kept us quiet. She would tell us scary stories so that we were scared to even move. We'd be sitting there all bunched up like sardines under a blanket, just listening to her. And she could keep our attention. probably better than anyone I've ever seen in my life working with kids. But that's about the first time I heard it, and I remember how scared I was. And I remember she told it. I heard it more than once from her, and when she would get to the end, to the last Reuben Banner, sometimes instead of saying it real slow, she would get right to the end, and then she'd stop, and we'd all be waiting for it. And then she'd say, "Reuben Banner," and we'd all jump. Ron, what do you remember?
Yeah, like I said, I remember the story too, and the way that she told it, it was almost vivid, like she was part of that life, like she was part of that community. So to her, to me, it kind of was real, and just like I said, the emotion and sheer passion she put behind it. But another thing that she used to do was, you imagine this frail little old lady. She would go get this big, huge blue bathrobe. I mean, this thing's the size of a blanket. And she would come through the house doubled over. She looked like, the Snuffleupagus or something. And she'd be swinging it back and forth, and you would hear her, Rueben. And here this little old 80-year-old lady comes all the way through the house doing that. And it, even though, most of us, once we got older, it was knew it was her, it still kind of creeped us out because we're just like, is that really her under there? Because you never could tell. And then, and then you go into another room because we'd always run off, and then she'd come in and act like nothing ever happened. Yeah. So it was always kind of cool to have Granny around.
It really was. And I told Lindsay that story. Did you tell your kids that story, Ryan?
I don't think I've told her that one. Told them.
I think growing up, I think I told it to him a few times, but I doubt Lindsay has ever heard it like she did tonight.
No, because I mean, when you told it that couple times, like you would do the voice and stuff, but you couldn't get like really low with it. So yeah. It was spooky, but it didn't sound like, you know what I mean, like real voice spooky.
Right.
All right, guys, and before we say goodbye, now that we're rolling, we're going to release new content every Friday, except on weeks of our special Sunday Scary episodes, which is just going to be me coming on here and telling you a couple short scary stories, but we'll give you guys a heads up on that stuff.
And sometimes we'll have some special, very special episodes, like the one that's coming up for Halloween. It will be released the day of Halloween, and it will feature our on-site investigation at one of the most haunted buildings in Virginia. You won't want to miss that one.
And finally, if you guys have stories of supernatural, please send them to us. We'd love to share and hear all these, so we might be able to put them on future episodes. And you can email them to us at sirensofthesupernatural@gmail.com. So we'd love to hear from you guys.
Tell your family about us, your friends about us, the ghost that haunts your house. Tell them about us too, because the more the spookier. We're Sirens of the Supernatural on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and also at Supernatural Sirens on TikTok.
And we're going to leave you with Stay Spooky.